Woman, you are the holy grail, the Magdalene. Woman, no need to search any.
Welcome to the Woman Arising podcast, hosted by Cathy Hartenstein and Zeffi, where we elevate and celebrate inspiring women on the rise. In this podcast, we talk to women from all walks of life about their soul's journey, the obstacles they overcame, and how they embody their feminine power. We hope to elevate women's place in the world, showcase their contributions, and provide inspiration for all women to rise to their fullest potential. Today, our guest is Lisa Gillette, an equal pay activist, keynote speaker, and certified executive coach focused on women's leadership. Lisa is intimately familiar with special challenges all women face in the workplace, having spent 25 years climbing the corporate ladder, the last 10 as an executive at Fox Sports. Along with providing strategic direction in the launch of over 300 sports networks in Asia, South America, and the U.S., Lisa formed the mentorship program Women Working in Sports, which focused on advancing more women employees into roles of higher leadership. Lisa's company, Big Sky Coaching and Consulting, is a natural extension of her desire to guide, support, and encourage women in their ascent up the ranks of leadership all the way into the C-suite. She helps clients see the big picture, connect the dots, discover opportunities, and overcome the challenges imposed by the constraints of female leadership. Her goal is to empower, guide, and support women leaders and high potentials to truly believe in their professional potential so they can confidently advance in their careers. She hosts the Grace, Grit, and Getting It Done podcast for women who want to focus on their personal development and professional priorities. Lisa was an inspiring presence in our Women Arising International Summit, and we are very proud to have her as our honored guest. Welcome, Lisa. It is our true pleasure to have you here today. We are very excited to hear about how you've been helping women navigate the challenges of the professional world in order to claim their true worth.
Oh, thank you, Cathy, and to Zeffi, who's not here today. I am so honored to be part of your podcast. You have an important message, and anything I can do to support getting it out, I am so there.
Well, we are thrilled because one of the big goals of what we're trying to do is help women rise. And I feel like you've really been dedicated to that for so much of your career. And with that in mind, I'd love to ask you, when you hear the term woman arising, what does that mean to you? What does that evoke in you? What emotions, what feelings?
How truly powerful and resilient women are. We're creative problem solvers. And there's a joke where I worked in television for many years, and there was this joke of, oh, we'll fix it in post. Well, as women, we are always looking out for others. And the downside of that can be sometimes we put ourselves back of the line, and I want to share about that. But, as women, we have to overcome some preconceived notions about who women are and what we're capable of. And so my intention when I hear women are rising, I am just like, yes, we need more women in leadership roles. We need more women because we're transformational. We're extremely creative. We create life. We create processes. We create systems. We create a better way of being in the world. And I think for most of us, our intention is to make things better. And so when I hear women are rising, I just go, yeah, I want to be one of those women. I want to support other women. And we just have so much potential. So let's do this.
I love that. And I feel like you really have been dedicated to helping women rise, certainly in the corporate world. But can you tell me kind of something about your life's journey? How did you get to where you are today through this process? And I know you have a very varied background in the arts, but then you wound up in sports. And what was that journey?
I never think of my journey as being anything other than organic. And yet when I talk to people and I talk about my trajectory, people are like, you did what? And then you went where? And how did that happen? So I think for anybody listening, the one message I want to share, because this is kind of my North Star, if you are forward thinking and you're really clear about your intention so that you're prepared to take action, when you see an opportunity, you will meet it with success. You might not always meet it with success the first time, but if you have an intention to make things better, because as women, we're creative problem solvers, you are going to find a way. So you're right. I started out in the performing arts. I was running a dance school and dancing in a small company in Portland, Oregon. And of course, I had to move to New York because that is the center of all artistry, at least in North America. And you could argue the world, but I had to move to New York. And that was kind of a rude awakening because I'd been a big fish in a small pond and I became a guppy in an ocean. But I made my way. And in the 80s, MTV was lighting up. And so to dance in music videos, there were a lot of opportunities. I was doing a video for a song called Do You Love Me Now That I Can Dance by the Contours. That was part of a soundtrack for a movie called Dirty Dancing. When they released the movie, no one thought it was going to do anything, and then it became a big hit. So the studio quickly said, oh, we've got to put out music videos. And I was in 2 music videos, but I was working with a partner I didn't know, and I sprained my hip. I couldn't perform. I couldn't teach. I was supposed to go on tour in Italy, and I had the ability to meet a woman at a party. God bless her. Her name was Kate Johnson. She worked for Showtime during the day, and then she freelanced at the local ABC affiliate. And she said, do you know what time code is? And I was like, yeah, I do know what time code is on a tape. And she goes, great. I need someone to screen tapes. Can you do it? And that was how I fell backwards into my television career.
Wow.
Total, like, I knew time code. I said, yes, I'll do this for you. So I did the best possible job I could for Kate. And that led me to work for a network as a room producer. And that network was Showtime. And from there, I went to another network. I went on staff. And then I just kept climbing up the corporate ladder. But in my second job, when I made my manager's title, I had a boss who was a screamer. And not only was he a screamer, but he didn't really have a very clear vision and he wasn't great at communicating. And I realized later that's why he screamed, because he felt like he was never understood, and he wasn't. So I started to realize that if you could communicate clearly to everybody you worked with what you needed from them and why, and how they could support the greater effort, they were more engaged. And that's when I was like, oh, maybe I got this leadership thing. And so I started climbing the corporate ladder, and I ended up in sports television. And honestly, I'm not a sports fan. I just knew how to build a nonlinear post-production facility, and I knew how to get the content on air. And that's why I was hired. So I've always been pretty focused, and I've always been a problem solver. And that helped me in this very large corporation where there were very few women in senior management, some in middle management, which is where I entered the company. But as I started to climb into senior management, I was often the only woman at the table. And I realized that many people were not comfortable speaking up. They waited to be asked. And if I had a solution, I spoke up. So I've always wanted to promote women into senior roles of leadership, because let's acknowledge we have some problems now in the world, and we need people who are thinking about everyone, the greater good, not the chosen few. And so that's why I'm such an advocate for women of all colors and greater diversity and people of all colors moving into senior management, because we've got a wider perspective and we've got different solutions that are going to help us through this critical time we're in right now.
I think that's so important. And I love your journey. I love how, in some ways, one thing just led to another, and that there wasn't necessarily a clear thought, oh, I'm going to become this, but in just being who you were, finding these opportunities, saying yes to these opportunities. Not everybody would. You really found this path of how you could sort of elevate these worlds that needed that feminine energy and needed to have new ways to communicate, and maybe that sensitivity and that creativity that is where you started really allowed for you to do something like that. So that's very, very powerful. And thinking about that, like what, pivotal experiences do you feel like have made that sort of indelible mark on your life? And sort of tying in, maybe what are some of the obstacles you encountered, and how'd you overcome them?
Well, that's a good question, and I could have so many responses. I need to acknowledge I came from a dysfunctional family, which is why when I talk with clients and other people, I always say, hey, let's put the fun into dysfunction. We got to laugh about this or else we're going to cry and we're going to never take action. But I did come from a dysfunctional family. I had a sibling who was sick a lot as a child. So I didn't always necessarily get the attention that I wanted or needed. And I became very focused and very observant as to when I could go in and I could get my mom's attention or I could get my dad's attention. And I could say, hey, I need this. And if you can give this to me, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and then it's all going to be better. And that was kind of a formula that I've used throughout my entire career. That's how I ended up managing a dance school. I'd never done that before. I ended up at an audition when I was in college and got a full-time job at a dance company. I was like, I can make this work. I can figure this out. I would say one of the big things that really shaped me in my corporate career was I went to a breakfast meeting for an industry event and the table captain didn't show up. And so the woman running the breakfast said, hey, will you be the table captain? Here's the list of questions. Just lead the conversation. And I was like, sure, of course, I'll do that. And sitting across the table from me, I had asked the question, what's the biggest challenge you have at work? And we'd gone around the table. And directly across from me, the woman burst into tears. She started crying on her omelet. And she started talking about her boss, who was a screamer. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know this person, but she's describing my boss. And I thought, gosh, it's not just me. I'm not the only person who's dealing with someone who should not be in a leadership role and who's extremely temperamental and can go from 0 to 1,000 decibels in a second. And I realized that I had some coping mechanisms. And so I got up and I walked around the table. I put my arms around this woman and I said, you're not alone. And that's really what motivated me as I got into corporate, because I didn't really find gender bias. Maybe I wasn't looking for it in the dance world. I know it does exist among choreographers, company leaders, but I was the dancer. I was an instrument. In corporate, gender bias was really obvious to me when I got into my manager's role. And so I've always been an advocate for people who don't have a voice or feel like they're not allowed to have a voice. And that's when I said, I got to do something about this. And so that was a real that was a defining moment for me, was going, oh my God, it's not just me. It's not my fault. I'm not creating this scenario and making this guy scream. That's who this guy is. Yeah. And there are many other people who are in leadership roles who exhibit bad behavior. As I like to talk about it, I call it male pattern misbehavior. And, one of them is that really aggressiveness. And it's counterintuitive to actually a good work environment. That's the highlight of a toxic work environment. So that was kind of my, oh my gosh, there's a problem. I've got some solutions. Let me share.
Well, I think that's so interesting. It was almost like an aha moment for you, and that you were able to see yourself reflected, realize you weren't alone, and that other people needed that connection and that support. The other thing I heard in what you were saying that I think is so interesting is, even though you had maybe some of this dysfunction as a child or whatever in your family dynamics, that somewhere in you had this deep belief in your own abilities, and that there was some part of you that said, I can do it and I'm going to do it and went for it. Where did that come from? Because I think that's so important. I think women struggle with that sometimes because we don't always see it reflected, right? And so to find that, how did you find that? I find that such an empowering thing and something to reflect and model for others.
One thing that I say to every client, I talk a lot about negotiating. And it's not just negotiating what you're paid, it's also negotiating where's your office? How big is your team? What kind of resources are you given? And one of the things that I think about all the time, and I say to my clients, is when you make it better for you, when you take that step, you're making it easier for every woman who follows after you. And so I think for many women, we talked about this just briefly, and we've talked about this in the past. As women, we do tend to be caretakers. We're hardwired that way. This is our chemical makeup. Estrogen makes us caregivers, and also society supports that. And so when we just think about, wow, if I make a stand for myself right now as a woman because someone's dismissing me or demeaning me or diminishing me because I'm female, I'm making it easier for every woman coming after me. And that is enough motivation for me to go, oh yeah, I'm going to keep doing this. I am not going to shut up. I'm not. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to ask the questions. I also want to be honest with you, Cathy. I have a very strong BS barometer. And so when that kicks in, I start asking questions. And as long as you can keep asking the questions that make people rethink what they're saying and realize, oh, she's not drinking the Kool-Aid. It's a way of challenging them in a way that is not aggressive. You're just trying to get more information to know better, to know how to do your job better. And that has been, for anyone listening, I would say, come prepared with a list of questions. Avoid the why. You can use, how will that make it better, instead of why does that make it better? Or why do you want to do it that way? How will doing it that way make it more effective? Because why can put people off a lot. But there's just so many language tools we can use to keep asking those questions. So I always encourage people, ask questions, get your answer.
I think that's so important. And I think people sometimes forget that, right? Because we sometimes are in hierarchical situations, if you're talking about the workplace. But, even in life, sometimes we skip ahead or we forget to we think we understand and we don't necessarily. And that conversation and that ability of that curiosity can be very, very powerful. You touched on this a little bit, but I am interested a little bit in those obstacles that, you really came across, because you picked some hard fields, right? And even just personally in life, the things that we deal with that really shape us in our own personal lives as well. But, you were a creative artist and you were, in this male dominated field. So just professionally, there were a lot of obstacles, but also how did you maintain yourself, or what were those things and those decisions? And I think those are really important things to see how, I look at you, you're so successful, but I know it wasn't always an easy path, right? And so what were those things? Because sometimes people get deterred by those obstacles as they start out on their path.
Right. I would say one thing that is really pretty important is that you get really clear on your intention. And I just want to share my highest intention. My highest intention right now is to be a conduit for energy. And what I mean by that is I believe there's an abundant source of energy. And if I can be an antenna for that and share that, I am good. Now, I take that into the practical realm of working with women, because my practical experience is that I spent 25 years in corporate. And I never thought, when I was starting my career as a dancer when I was 19, and I started to get paid for performing and teaching, that I would ever go into corporate. And yet I had an injury and I needed another career. And I was like, okay, well, what's my intention? I need health insurance. A corporate gig is going to give me health insurance. And that transition from being a dancer to being a writer-producer, which is what I was. I created and wrote 30-second spots for cable networks, for the movies that were airing on cable networks. You think about there being a stage, which is proscenium stage, that's a monitor. So I thought, okay, I need health insurance. I understand visually how this is working. I've always been facile with words, with writing, so I can make this transition. But the obstacles, I think, that are external, and let's acknowledge the big ones, actually pale compared to the internal obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the self-consciousness that we all have as women about, how is this going to influence others? How is this going to impact others? Are they not going to like me? All of that can play such havoc in our prefrontal cortex that we just drop down to our limbic brain, the most primitive part, and we're like, oh, let me be safe and small. Being safe and small doesn't help anybody. So I circle back to, how can you make it better, not only for yourself, but for others, and how can you share that? So I would say, overcoming any obstacle, just get really clear about what your intention is. It doesn't have to be really specific. Mine is really general. I want to be a conduit for celestial and terrestrial energy that's abundant. I'm just a straw, an antenna. And knowing that, those obstacles that are external, they're there, but I can navigate around them.
That is so beautiful. And I think making that sort of simple way of looking at it can be very, very empowering. I think so often we do get into those internal obstacles. We sabotage ourselves sometimes because of whatever those fears are, and to kind of let go of some of those fears is always challenging, I think. But I like how you're saying, if you're just focused on what is that goal and how do I get there, and look at it maybe in that way, you maybe can let go of some of those internal obstacles. Was there ever a time or moment for you where you made that shift, or was that something you always knew?
No, I think I had to consciously make that shift, because part of being able to actually achieve your goals for everyone is knowing that you deserve to achieve them. And so I think, and this is the estrogen versus testosterone chemistry. And also the fact that as women, we have so many more neural pathways between our right lobe and our left lobe. And so we're more empathetic. So, the right lobe is that creative, nonlinear, musical thinking part. And the left lobe is that very logical, critical thinking part. And because as women, we've got major highways between those two lobes in terms of neural pathways, we've also got garden paths. We've got, big pathways, skinny pathways, all sorts of pathways, neural pathways. And that's what makes us so empathetic. And when we truly do believe, and this is why I always say, when you achieve something as a woman, you're making it easier for every woman coming after you. That ties into, I want the species to survive. I want to make it better for everybody. And then you can go, wait a minute, I am part of the greater community. I do deserve the benefits of making it better for everybody. I do deserve this job, this title, this great relationship, this lovely home, whatever it might be, fulfillment, happiness. I do deserve to achieve my full human potential.
I love that. So with some of this in mind, you have worked in the corporate arena, in a very male-dominated arena, sports in particular. And I'm wondering, I know you said you didn't experience gender bias when you were a dancer, or it wasn't as apparent to you, but were there instances in this experience that maybe you did experience gender bias and felt marginalized, and how did you overcome it? And you spoke about it a little bit, but also, you're dealing with this when you're helping other women navigate this as well. We live in this patriarchal world, And it's a lot of times hard for us to see ourselves reflected out there. And we kind of experience gender bias or sexism throughout our culture. And I'm really wanting for women to be able to understand, like, how do we combat that? How do we really assert ourselves and claim our worth inside of that?
So I did something that I would not recommend, which is if someone was shouting at me, I became extremely sarcastic, like biting. Just for those of you who follow astrology, I have Mercury in Scorpio, which means I have a very sharp tongue, very sharp, and I have to watch it. And so instead of raising my voice, I would just say some of the most cutting things in a voice that sounded like this, just super condescending. And, that's a better thing to do if you're angry, because let's acknowledge, as women, we can't lose our cool. We can't look flustered. We can't show anger, because we're going to be termed either hysterical, bitchy, bossy, all that bad stuff. But I would suggest, and this is something, the best boss I ever had was a woman. And if she's listening, I'm shouting out to you, Rebecca O'Sullivan, the best boss I ever had. She did this really interesting thing when she would correct someone. She did this little laugh, and she'd go, you might want to rethink that. Can I help you rethink that? And I just thought that was brilliant. So let's acknowledge we have to work to change systemic gender bias, but we also have to work within the system, which is radical acceptance. We don't agree with it. We don't support it. We don't believe in it, but we've got to navigate through it. So one of the things that I would say whenever you're dealing with systemic gender bias is you keep showing up. You don't run away from it. You keep speaking up. You keep asking those questions. And when someone is really dismissive to you, and there's so many strategies, but two simple things you can respond is, can you repeat that? I'm not sure I understood what you meant. And then you lean back and you stop talking. And usually that's enough to make the other person go, oh God, I crossed the line. Right. Or the other thing you can say, which is something that I hear a lot, is, was that meant to be hurtful or helpful? And then again, silence is so powerful. So powerful, but you've got to maintain the eye contact and try as best you can. And this works for men too, because let's just acknowledge, and I want to share this story. I'll make it really short. When we had game day, we had live events on the air when I was working, and you could go from 3 different sporting events in one day. And so people would get, and it was usually the same crew on a 12-hour shift, people would get really kind of crazy. And of course, they'd be drinking coffee and eating donuts or cupcakes or something. So they'd be caffeinated and just flipped with sugar. And I saw some fistfights in the control room. In fact, I broke up a couple of them. But the thing that's so weird about men is they can pummel each other, they can throw shade, and they're all like, hey, dude, let's go out for beer. When women are dismissive towards each other, it's like taking a dagger in the heart. And we never forget it, and we never trust each other again. So number one, I would say just be aware that men respond differently in social situations than women. And a lesson that it took me a while to learn is be professional with everybody. You don't need to be solicitous, but be professional. And for me, especially, stop the snarky. I have a really sharp tongue, and it would slither out and would sting people. And when you take down anyone in front of an audience, they will never forgive you, man or woman.
Those are really good, actual, very specific tips. And I think they're really important to remember, because so much of the time we're not able to emotionally regulate, right? And so we go into our habitual response. And just having that thought or that breath or that tool really can make a big difference. Were there any times where people were dismissive of you as a woman, or where you had to prove yourself, or you had to work a little bit harder?
Oh, yeah.
Woman?
I had to keep repeating myself. That's the other thing that I coach clients around is you want to be really clear in communication. When you're communicating up or to colleagues, depending on the colleague, no more than 3 points. Otherwise, it's too much for them to absorb. And, you may say each point a little bit differently each time, but the message remains the same. Now, obviously, you're talking to a subordinate and you're saying, we have to do this project. Here's your responsibility. You let that subordinate ask you all the questions. You give them all the details. They will tell you when they've got it. But when you're communicating up, definitely, and with some colleagues, no more than 3 bullet points. So you really want to nut down your communication. And, many times conversations that I had when I was being dismissed is, oh, I'm sure your intention is to make this work, but that won't work. And here's why.
Mm.
And then I'd give them the reason. If you do X, I know you want Y, but Z is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Can I help you? And then I'd lean back. And when you lay it out that clearly, and you normally have to repeat yourself 3 times, and I, again, would always just try and be emotionless. This is another thing that I do with myself, definitely with my colleagues, understand what triggers you.
Oh.
When someone screams at me or yells at me, I didn't grow up in a household where that happened. We're all Italian, so we raised our voices in glee, like, this is great, we all love this. We never were talking like this.
Right.
And the first time I ran into that, I was like, what? You can't talk to me that way. But I was so shocked I couldn't even get those words out.
Wow.
And that's when I started really diving into language and how you can use language to influence people. And, I just say with everyone, if you're a woman or a man and someone is not acknowledging you, they're dismissing you, stay on script, 3 points, keep repeating them. The language can vary a little bit, but the meaning has to be clear. 3 points, no more.
That's interesting. And it sounds like that you went into this world that maybe was a little bit foreign, because I know in a creative environment, it's a lot more collaborative. You talk through things, you build on each other's ideas.
Right.
The corporate world is more about efficiency and getting things done, and that you really were able to adapt yourself and find the ways in which you could elevate them and bring in a specific way to kind of reshape that environment for yourself, which is not always easy to do. And I'm sure there must have been times when you were trying to figure that part out.
I will definitely say one of the things that I do is I give myself the space and time to do my R&D, to do my research, and to develop a strategy. And I know with the boss I had who was a screamer, and he's like a good, large part of the reason that I do what I do now was this person who screamed, and everybody in the office was afraid of him. Even the president of the company was afraid of this guy. I went and I talked to the president and I said, I need some training on how to deal with difficult people. And he looked at me and he said the guy's name, and I said, mm-hmm. And he goes, sure, no problem. Do what you need. So I went to external resources, and that's one thing that I really want to share with anybody listening. Don't do this by yourself. There are so many books written about any topic that is an issue you might be dealing with. Start with the experts. Start doing your research. Find somebody to talk to. Find somebody who's experienced the problem you are currently experiencing, who's got a solution, and study. Either get the book, have the conversation. There are so many things going on that we haven't learned, we haven't seen until we get to be adults. So there's a lot of support out there. Don't feel you have to figure this out by yourself. You don't. Reach out for help.
I love that. Well, in thinking all of that and sort of how you brought this feminine way of communicating and connecting into this more male dominated space, can you talk to me about a time where maybe you felt most connected to your feminine power and feminine essence, and what did you gain from that experience?
I have every time I talk to a client and they have a aha, I just want to be honest. I rarely take on men as clients. I have, but I rarely do that because I'm much more tuned in to what women are dealing with in a corporate setting. But every time I was at a conference, I was speaking at a conference in Paris, and I was so excited to be there. And the day I land, there's a strike. And I'm staying in a hotel near the airport, and I take a cab to the hotel. And I'm like, great, I'm going to take the RER in. I'm going to go see Paris. I'm going to run around. I'm going to have a fantastic meal. I'm going to go to museums. It's like, no, you're not. You can take $100 or €100 cab ride in. And so I was kind of bummed, but I spoke the next day. I was on relatively early. The conference started at 9. I was in the 10 a.m. slot. And it was not a big group. But as I started speaking and I was talking about the language of leadership, and what I was talking about is how, as human beings, we so quickly identify someone coming towards us that we're meeting for the first time. And within like the first second, we've decided whether they're a threat or they're safe. And when they open their mouth, we've then decided whether we want to know more about them or not. And then when we actually start interpreting their words, we begin to go, oh, yeah, I feel like I've known this person forever. Or like, oh, nice to meet you, next. And so I'm talking about this, and I'm hearing the women in the audience going, uh-huh, oh, yeah, yeah. And I just got this wash of, oh, my people, my tribe. And what's interesting about it is that was recorded, and I've shared it with other people, and I've shared it with a couple of buddies who are men, and they had the same reaction. But for me to be in that room surrounded primarily by women, I would say 80%, 90% were women. There were a few men there, 10% were men. That I just, I got that feeling of, God, as a group, we can do whatever it takes. So we need to connect, we need to collect our resources, and we need to set our intentions. Whatever we bring to the table, because we all have special gifts, we can say, okay, maybe I can't do that, but I bring this, and this is how I'm going to support this effort. So for me, it's not just about empowering women. It's women of all colors and people of all colors to get them into leadership roles. Because let's just acknowledge 1 out of 4 people in the world today do not have access to clean drinking water. 3 out of 10 people in the world today do not have access to basic sanitation.
Yeah, it's really true.
I mean, let's not even talk about whether they're in an environment where they have a government that's a democracy, which I think is pretty important, but just those basic needs. And so we have some problems that need to be solved, or the planet human beings are not going to be able to live here anymore because we're destroying it. So that's why I want to see greater diversity in senior leadership. We've got to come up with some solutions, and we need to do it really quickly. So when I am in a group of women who are like, we got some work to do, let's roll up our sleeves, that's when I'm like, and I also find it in nature. When I'm out in nature by myself, I feel very tied into the female deity.
Well, and I love how when you were sort of speaking your truth, seeing that reflected in other women, that really is a big part of how you connect to that divine feminine power in you. And then you started to touch on this, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like what unique contributions and perspectives you feel that women play in the part of building our collective future in the world that we're inhabiting. And I think, what specifically is women's role in all of that? And I liked how you began to kind of touch on that and what you were just saying.
So a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, I started studying Buddhism. And I was brought up in a Christian household, but really my mom was an atheist, my dad was agnostic, and we went to church at Christmas. And so I did study the Bible as literature, but First and Second Testament, but I can't say I was a religious person. I've always been very spiritual. I do believe in reincarnation. I do believe in, I will say, a creative force, because all of this that we're living in, the earth, was not random. There was intention behind it. And I don't think as human beings we can say there is a deity made in our image. I think that's very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Hubristic? Is that the word? The word is that, like, wow, we're so people-centered and we think everything is made in our image. And no, it is not. We are just another piece of fauna on the earth. So the Dalai Lama had said in 2010, Western women will save the world. And I was like, well, of course we will. Because one, we have the intention, we have the knowledge, we have the resources, and we've got the desire. So we need to come together collectively. And I had mentioned this just briefly, just a little bit ago, that everybody comes to the table with specialized skills. And thank goodness, because we don't want a bunch of people who are strategic thinkers. I am always in my head, which is why I do so much body work, because I want to connect into my body. I'm like floating up here somewhere thinking. We need people who have other capabilities too, and so I think everybody brings a special talent and we need the full 360. So I think when women come together, and there is space for men and those white men who have moved away from the white male patriarchy and go, that system doesn't work. We're in crisis. That system doesn't work. Command control as a leadership style does not work. We need to move to a transformational leadership style. We need to understand that we motivate and inspire other people to do things they didn't know how to do, didn't think they could do, didn't believe they could do. That's when we get the solutions. That's when we move forward. So there is definitely space for everyone at the table who has the intention to make it better and to solve the world's problems. And so I think as women, we're definitely problem solvers. We want to make sure the human race survives. This is hardwired into us. And so, when the Dalai Lama said, Western women will save the world, I was like, yeah, now let's focus on that and let's make that happen.
I absolutely love that. And I love the idea that everybody brings their unique talent to something, and that when we collectively rise as women, bringing these talents that maybe haven't been as visible in the world up to the surface, that's a really big cosmic shift, and that it takes all of us. It's not one particular thing. So I think that's very powerful. And you touched on this in what you were just talking about, but that sense of spirituality and that, what are some of the things that you do to cultivate that sort of divine feminine power and energy inside yourself?
I am a Reiki master, and I study with a fantastic Reiki master whose name is Eleanor Curry, who is based out of Maui. And I've been working with her since, I want to say 2015. One of the things that I don't do, because I coach so much and I create a lot of content around women working in a corporate setting, I don't teach Reiki, and I've only attuned a few people who I'm very close with. But what I do every day is I practice Reiki. And literally that is that terrestrial energy and that celestial energy. The celestial entering through the crown of the head, the terrestrial entering through the soles of the feet and meeting at your heart, and then through your arms into your hands. And that was something that I tied into as a little kid, because as a small child, and I want to thank her wherever she is, she's close by, Josephine Vincent, my grandmother, had arthritis in her hands, and she lived with us when I was a child. And I always had a lot of heat coming out of my hands. And I would put my hands over her hands because she had arthritis in her hands. And that was when I kind of first tapped into, oh, there's heat in my hands. Oh, it feels good. Oh, I can put it on my belly. Oh, if I have a headache, I can put it on my head. Not understanding that one way of accessing that energy is through Reiki.
Wow.
And so I practice Reiki. I don't talk about it a lot. When you talk about things of a spiritual nature in the corporate world, people are like, no, it's got to be dollars and cents, not SENSE, not common sense, but CENTS, right? So, all I can really talk about is what's your gut instinct? Because that's that terrestrial energy,
Yeah.
that grounding. So for me, I ask my spirit guides for help. I know exactly who they are. Some of them I'm not sure where they came from. Others are loved ones who have passed on. And I ask my animal guides. And I have a very large, sometimes overpowering imagination, and I'm very visual. So I know exactly what each of them looks like. They all have names. And, I would say to anybody who works with animal guides or spirit guides, they're there. They just ask them for help. They want to help you. Just say, please help me. I need some support. And they will be right there with you.
I love that. Well, and it's interesting because it sounds like one of the core things in your life is energy and is sort of channeling energy, and that is the way you perceive things. And even in the work that you do when you're talking about communicating, even though you do get very specific, it is about that energetic exchange between people and how to sort of be really conscious and make those decisions around how we want to use our energy, how we want to spend energy, how we want to receive that energy. And I think you're very interesting because you have this brilliant brain and you have all of this really great way of being able to put things together, but you also are very in your body, right? You were a dancer for years. You sort of experience a lot in your body. It's a very physical experience for you. And then to have that connection to that energy, it's like body, mind, spirit really blending together for you in a lot of ways, the work that you're doing. And lastly, I'd love to ask you, as you're sort of reflecting on your life's journey, I'd love to hear a little bit about, what are some of the profound lessons and insights that you found that you really feel are essential for women to embrace as they navigate their lives? And what do you wish somebody had told you as a young woman?
Oh, I will say that my father was someone who actually told me, you can do whatever you want, kid. Just make sure you don't get hurt and you don't hurt anybody. I was like, okay, Dad, great. So he gave me permission. And his name was Noah Gillette. And he's definitely one of my spirit guides. He's definitely there, as is my grandmother. I think one of the things, so that was very empowering. And I just want to drop a little bit of data. For women who have a very strong father figure, or for women who play sports and understand the team mentality as a child, a lot of them go into leadership roles because they're empowered to do it, even though society as a whole does not say, hey, yeah, you can be a leader as a woman. So I just find that really interesting. I had a very supportive father, and I did play sports as a kid. I also danced as a child and did a lot of performing, a lot of recitals where, everybody's working together. One of the things that it took me a while to figure out, because I have a very loud inner critic, the not enough voice that comes up in our limbic brain, like, oh, don't do that. What are people going to think about you? Oh, if you do that, you're going to fail. You're not smart enough. You're not. My message is no one wants to be your friend. That's my message. you're not interesting enough, you're not smart enough, you're not funny enough. That's the message. And I really wish that I had the languaging to know self-consciousness is the opposite of self-awareness. If we're self-aware and we know, like I know I'm kind of messy. I am. I like stacks of stuff. I like to spread stuff out on the floor. I like to push stuff around. I'm a bit of a hoarder. I'll just say that. I am. But I'm also a strategic thinker, so I will have 3 solutions to any problem. And if one part of solution number 1 is not working, I've got a piece that I can drop in. So that self-awareness comes into, I'm a strategic thinker. Yeah, I might be kind of messy, but here's what I'm really good at. So let me forgive myself for being messy and focus on this thing that I've got, the ability to strategically think. Yeah. And what's interesting to me is when you said, you are grounded in your body. And I'm like, yeah, I am grounded in my body. That's what gives me a feeling of comfort, is having my feet firmly on the ground so that my crown can reach up into the heavens, which is kind of what I was talking about, that terrestrial celestial energy, that connection, that antenna. But to know that, be self-aware and self-forgiving, I think is so important, because as women, we tend to be self-conscious. We've got all this BS that happens in the media about how we should look and what we should wear and what our lives should be like. It's all fabricated. It's not real. It's all Photoshop. So we need to practice self-compassion so we can build greater self-awareness. And that's the way to get to our full human potential. We're never going to reach it, because when we get to our full human potential, that's when we leave this body. That's my belief. Whether that's true for everybody, but that's my belief. So it's let go of the self-consciousness, practice the self-awareness, strive for full potential as a human being in this existence, and know that energy doesn't dissipate. It just recombines.
I absolutely love that. That energy doesn't dissipate. It just recombines. I think that's a really important thing. And I think you're right. A lot of that difference between self-conscious and self-awareness, that's a great distinction for people to make, because a lot of the times we get in that negative critic voice in our heads. I don't know why we give it so much power, but so often we do. It's usually fear will unleash it, and then we'll, create every bad what if, and then, but to make that shift and to find that self-compassion is really important. And I think as we get older too, that becomes a little bit easier, because in order to sort of become who we need to become, we have to accept who we are. And so I think that that's part of that journey. But I think it's also interesting that sometimes that also spurs us on, right? Because we are able to sort of prove something to ourselves. Because I find a lot of women who are successful, who you'd never expect that of, also experience some of that
yeah, some of the highest. I did a talk not too long ago to a group of students, and I said, does anybody have that little voice in their head that always says, oh, don't do that? Oh, you're not good enough. And I said, you know what that little voice means, actually? That you're a high achiever, because that little voice is telling you, you're going to be found out, you're going to be discovered for, getting something that you shouldn't have gotten, or you got permission to do something that you shouldn't have gotten permission to. And my response was, when you hear that little voice and you get concerned that you're going to be found out for being a fraud, actually it means you're a high achiever.
It can motivate you.
Right.
That doesn't mean one hang on to that necessarily, but
exactly. Want to let that go.
And lastly, how can people get in touch with you? Are there any sort of upcoming things that you'd like our audience to know, and how can we support you?
Oh my goodness. Well, being on this podcast is great. I so appreciate that you asked me to be here. I'm really honored. People can follow me on Instagram. I am Big Sky Coach _Lisa _Gillette. You can also go to my website and contact me there, which is www.bigsky, BIGSKY.coach, COACH. Had to get the vanity website. So follow me on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn as Lisa Gillette. My last name is just like the brand name, Gillette. And what's coming up right now, I am about to finally upload a course, an online course it's called How to Negotiate Like a Leader. And it takes people through the process of how do you make a compelling request for your fair market value, whether you're negotiating an internal offer or an external offer. It's a step-by-step process. And we start with mindset, because honestly, if you don't believe you deserve what you're asking for, you're not going to really be able to have a successful negotiation. And we know that women can lose anywhere. And every time I say these numbers, it just breaks my heart. From $1 to $5 million over the course of their career by not negotiating, by not simply asking, is there any upward movement in this number? You just have to ask that question. And there usually is more money there. So when you ask that question, you put a big smile on your face and you lean back and you stop talking, because silence makes people uncomfortable. So just acknowledge that. Just say, is there any upward movement in this number? Lean back and stop talking. So that'll be all posted on my website, and there'll be all sorts of stuff on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook. Again, it's Big Sky Coach, Lisa Gillette, and on Instagram. And I love comments on Instagram because followers have given me great topics to speak about. And I'm like, oh, you really want to hear what to say to a colleague who, is not doing their job? Here's what to say. So I'm like, I love requests.
Well, that is great. And I have to say, I've worked with Lisa and Lisa for many years now, and she is spectacular at helping you, not just with the nitty gritty, but also to claim your feminine power and to see yourself and to feel really supported. So I really recommend that if you're interested in this kind of work, or just really knowing how you want to claim your worth in the workplace, I would really reach out to Lisa. She's fantastic. Thank you so much. It was such an honor to have you on our show today. I'm sorry Zeffi couldn't join us, but she will be back soon. And Lisa, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cathy. My honor, my pleasure. And just, I so appreciate you. So appreciate you and your work and the work you and Zeffi do together. So needed at this time.
Thank you for tuning in to Woman Arising, where we celebrate the resilience, wisdom, and power of women on the rise. Remember, when women rise, we all rise. If you're ready to embark on your journey of empowerment, sign up for our mailing list at womanarising.com and join our community of strong, inspiring women. To connect with Zeffi Devi and ignite your inner fire, visit zeffidevi.com and sign up to get your free tantric meditation. Let Zeffi illuminate your path, helping you discover the magic and power that reside within you. To connect with Cathy Hartenstein and claim your spectacularness, visit createmorebliss.com and sign up for a free 30-minute consult call where she can help you break through your emotional blocks to success. Let Cathy be your guide on this journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Thank you for being a part of the Woman Arising community. Together, let's continue to uplift, inspire, and empower women everywhere. Until next time, keep rising, keep shining, and keep embracing the divine feminine power that resides within you.
You are the holy grail, the Magdalene. Woman, no need to search any longer.